Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I am your host, Zach Bitter. I have an exciting announcement to make. I am offering a chance to win a free 30-minute consultation with me. Entering is very simple. Just share an episode on any social media platform, tag me, or send a screenshot to hpopodcast@gmail.com. This is important because if you don't tag share with me, I may not see it and be able to enter you in the raffle. You can enter as many times as you want. There will be a winner announced during the show intro at the beginning of each month. I appreciate all the listeners who have participated in this so far. It really does go a long way in helping me grow the show when you share the episodes you like with your friends, family, and followers. Also, a new way to enter the raffle is to submit a show review on your favorite podcast platforms. Other ways to support the show is you can head to the show landing page, which is just zachbitter.com/HPO. There you will be able to find access to the show Patreon page where you can actually access shows early and ad-free by subscribing to the show on Patreon. You can also donate in other ways on that landing page, as well as access the full catalog of episodes, descriptions, show notes, and transcripts if you're interested in diving into some of the previous episodes. I do want to give a quick shout out to my Endurance Training Simplified series of episodes. It's gotten quite long, so I listed them in the show notes. You can link to each one of those there, but if you're looking to start your endurance journey or just really fine tune it, I have a whole series of episodes that deal with just training principles in general and the different components that go into it between like easy running, speed work with short intervals, long run development, the mental side of training, all sorts of different stuff. So check those out in the show notes if you're interested in refining your endurance training. If you'd like a little bit of extra support in your training, I'm actually launching a new coaching package. So this new one is actually a group training process that is online. What it is if you subscribe to it, you will get access to my full catalog of pre-made endurance plans, which range from 5K up to 100-mile, come in multiple levels and multiple different durations. And you have access to that as long as you're subscribed. So if you decide to train for a specific distance or event, all you got to do is let me know, and I send you the copy of that particular training program. But what comes with it is what is important, in my opinion, is when you're subscribed to this new group coaching package, you will also be able to attend a weekly meeting with me and the other group members where we will cover topics that I find important for your endurance training journey, as well as questions and schedule adjustments that you have submitted beforehand, and then also some live questions from the group. The group size is going to be limited to 30 though, so make sure you sign up soon because I will be starting this program before the end of 2023 to make sure people have access to this by the start of the new year. You can find information on that by just heading to my website at zachbitter.com or linking to it in the show notes. Supporting the show this year are my friends at Element Electrolytes and Delta G Ketones. I have full descriptions about how I use both of these products in my training and racing at the end of the show. So if you're interested in checking that out, please stick around after this episode. For now, just some discounts and promotions from both of these products. Element Electrolytes is offering a free sample pack with your first purchase. Just go to drinklmnt.com/HPO. They have a no questions asked money back guarantee if you are unsatisfied. They also just released their warm beverage winter collection, which now includes raspberry chocolate. I just checked it out. It will be in my morning coffee protocol this winter. Delta G Ketone is the exogenous ketone company that has almost all of the research behind its formula. They are trusted by professionals around the world. You can get 20% off with code BITTER20. Just go to deltagketones.com. There you can also sign up for a free consultation where they will help you understand how their product may fit best in your lifestyle, and then you can compare it to mine. Links to both of these products can be found in the show notes as well as the show sponsor landing page, which is zachbitter.com/HPO sponsors.
The backyard stuff. Yeah, the backyard stuff's crazy.
Yeah, they have one of the bigger ones, the Big's Backyard.
That's this week, right?
Yeah, they're doing it right now. They started on Saturday, And last I checked, which was like maybe an hour ago, I think they were on like 56 yard or something like
Oh
that.
my
And they
gosh.
had one report. I can't remember the lady's name. But they're like, she passed out crossing the finish line of the yard, and they're carrying her back to her tent. So I'm guessing she's not going back out for the next yard.
Oh my
But
gosh. With these ultra runners, you never know them. And I wouldn't be
yeah.
surprised if she got back after it. Because each yard is like 4.117 or whatever it is.
In that particular event, the way they do it is they start or during the day you're on a trail, and then you switch to a road at night. So they do have a little bit of variance in that
Oh,
one.
I didn't know that.
Most of them, I think it's the same loop, just because they probably don't have a whole lot of options
Yeah.
outside of that. But
That's surprising for that one, especially because that's like the original one, right? And is it
Yeah.
Laz? Is he the guy that?
Yep.
He seems like the more torture, the better.
yeah, he's got a weird kind of way of it where he adds a bunch of little like kind of characteristics where you can see the masochism in there.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, to come up with some of these races, like what is the main one that he also puts on?
Barclays.
Barclays, yeah, that
Yeah.
one. I mean, who even comes up with that stuff? It's
I know.
crazy.
Yeah, I had John Kelly on the podcast not too long
Yeah.
ago, and he's won it. He won it, and he's finished twice now. So it was a weird year where 3 people finished. So
That's
he was
crazy.
second this year despite finishing, and it was fun to hear him talk about that. Where it's just like it is always like a little bit of a calculation because he wants it to be doable. He doesn't like it to be something where like everyone is like there's no way anyone's gonna finish. So there has to be like a sliver of chance,
Right.
but it can only be a sliver.
Yeah, I mean, 3 people out of. Do you know how many people did it this year?
That's a good question. I don't know how many are in there. It's not a ton. It's less than 100, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember, like, I guess the weather was really good this year. So I asked John about that. I was like, well, what is he going to do then? Because he doesn't want to. Because normally you would think, okay, 3 people finished. He's going to make it like they're in trouble next year, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
But he's like, well, maybe not, because he doesn't want to do that and then have bad weather come through, which isn't uncommon, and then have it be a situation like no one can even finish a lap.
Right.
So. Or a yard, or not a yard. Yeah, it's a lap there.
Have you seen the Gary Robbins documentary?
That's
one of
pretty
my
wild.
favorites. It's
yeah.
so good.
Yeah, could you imagine?
Oh my gosh, it was like 6 seconds he missed it by.
Yeah.
Spoilers?
Yeah, and I believe with his situation was he actually got off course too, or something like that.
Yeah.
And he knew at the time, I'm not gonna be able to fix this mistake, so I might as well just carry on, because he would have got timed out if he had went back to try to fix the
Right.
mistake. But I was like, that's what I was most interested in talking with John about, was just like, you have this, like, if you finish, it's going to be barely under 60 hours. So you're looking at that relative sleep deprivation and everything in a scenario where you already really can't make a whole lot of mistakes.
Right.
So like when you're out there for 50 hours, and it's just like you're one mistake away from this whole thing unraveling on you, just like the psychological damage you could do to a person if they're like really invested in that event.
The sleep deprivation of those has got to be one of the hardest things to overcome. Like one of my friends, Pierce, just completed the Triple Crown of 200s.
I saw that.
And I haven't talked to him since Moab, but I think he slept maybe like 4 to 6 hours across 90 hours it took to finish. It's like that. It's from what I've known from him. It's the sleep deprivation is the hardest part of those.
I would think so. I know, and it's different from one person to the next
Yeah.
too. I think I remember one of the first time that I really started looking at that side of the sport was there's an event in Phoenix called Across the Years, where they start 3 days at the end of one year and then the next 3 days into the next year for their 6-day event.
Oh, okay.
So hence Across the Years.
Yeah.
And they had a year where it was like a little more of a production, because the Giannis Kyrgios was coming in at the time. He had basically all the timed event world records, and he was older at that point. I think he was he wasn't even 60 years old. So he had like transitioned all the way just to like 6 days, because that's what he could be competitive with yet at that point. Dang. And he was kind of going back and forth between Joe Fegis, this guy from the U.S., and Joe actually slept a lot more than Giannis did. And Giannis had like such a strict plan, though. He had his crew detailed to the point where he had 8 hours during the 6 days that he could sleep, and it was all like exact. And he's like, don't let me deviate from the plan at all. And at one point I was following the live stream. It was like day 5. And they're like, Giannis is weaving in and out of the loop, and he's running into fences.
Oh no! Who ended up winning?
Joe Fee just ended up winning.
Interesting.
So I think I was looking at, there's actually some reasonably good research on this compared to what you would think for something like this. And it's on cycling stuff, because they've had a lot more like long stage cycling stuff. Right. And they did one year, I can't remember what the event was, but they had a team that used it as a strategy. They started sleeping a little earlier than most people would expect. and they ended up doing much better at the end, to the degree that they were like probably moving fast enough to justify whatever time they spent sleeping. And my only question with that was, like, if you're on a bike, obviously you have to be a little more attuned to what's going on, because you can't really be falling off the bike the way you can just stumble around when you're running.
No, I believe it. I can't speak from experience because I haven't done anything longer than a 50 miler, but from being with Pierce for like the Tahoe 200 that he did, I paced him for there, and that race he was way more strict on, like, okay, I'm only going to sleep for 90 minutes at a time. I'm going to sleep not at all the first night. I'm only going to sleep the second night. And then he didn't have a great race. He finished it, but it was a struggle for sure. And then the second race was harder, but he went way more based off of feel. He's like, if I feel like I need to take a nap, I'm just going to lay in the dirt, take a nap if I need to, sleep whenever, or even as long as I want to. And he had a much better race because of that. And then in my own experience too, it seems like when I don't have a super strict plan to adhere to, and I just kind of go off of feel throughout the race and be a little bit more adaptable, that's where I have better races. And it seems like that's kind of the key with some of these longer things.
Yeah. I think when you start trying the way I look at ultras in general is you want to have a plan and a structure there, so that you're not like just throwing caution to the wind.
Right.
But you should go in knowing that like there's going to be some deviation and there's going to be some sliding of things. So I think sleep fits into that, where Mike McKnight talks about this, where when he got into the longer stuff, he would say, okay, I'm going to try to plan a sleep at, I mean, some of it's like you have these big aid stations with sleeping cots. It's like, well, yeah, that's where you want to sleep. But if you get there and you can't fall asleep, you just waste your time lying around, versus you're out there barely functioning and you could lay down and sleep on the dirt. That's the spot you got to do it, I guess. So.
Yeah, having some sort of plan, but being adaptable and knowing you might need to deviate if certain things come up. Yeah,
it's interesting. But non-sleeping related events, 2:44:10 was it?
2:44:11.
11. Awesome. Yeah, so we're talking about the Chicago Marathon, which you just got back from not too long ago, with a goal of running a sub 2:45, which you clearly got.
Yeah, it was tough. It hurt a little bit, but I mean, the weather, for me, I feel like the weather is the number one factor on race day. Like, I train as intentional as I can for nutrition, so I try and eliminate any kind of error for nutrition things. I try and train for the course as much as I can in terms of like elevation gain or turns and things like that. But the weather is like the one thing, in my opinion, that is totally out of your control that can have the largest effect. So I basically won the weather lottery. I mean, world record was set that same day too, so I think they can attest to that as well. But no, I mean, everything went perfectly to plan. I like to set like A goal, B goal, C goals going into races, and A goal was sub 2:45, and everything went according to plan. So
didn't you have to think about B goal?
Really didn't have to think about it. No. I was like an 8-minute PR from what I ran in Boston earlier this year. Boston's obviously a little bit harder course, more hilly for sure, but I mean, I was happy with it overall. 8-minute PR. I mean, if it was a 10-second PR, I would have been happy, but even just getting that goal time was good too. And even, I mean, for me at this point, the goal times are kind of arbitrary, but being able to set a goal and go out and execute on it is a good feeling. Yeah,
no doubt. Yeah, you put a lot of work into it. So, and structuring the training around it, so you kind of have that like in the back of your mind the whole time, is that like sub 2:45 number. Was it pacing pretty even the whole way? Were you just kind of hitting your split, or did you have a little bit of strategy there?
Yeah, I always tried a negative split, just because from my very first marathon I did early 2022 was a wreck of a marathon. I still ran 3 hours flat, so it was like, in terms of marathons, for first marathons, it was good. But yeah, positive splits like the whole time. Went out at like 6:20 pace. Should have been at like 6:50 or 7 minutes, and just slowly digressed throughout the race. So I learned my lesson there, just bonked really hard at mile 20, and I was like, I'm never doing that again. And so every race I've done since then, I've negative split, and I finished feeling a lot stronger. Just the race as a whole feels a lot better, because you're not fighting the whole way. You're kind of just comfortable more or less for the majority of it, and it doesn't really get hard till maybe mile 20 or so. But yeah, I mean, as far as the splits, I mean, I think the goal pace was about 6:15 per mile. I want to say the first 5K, 10K, I was like 6:20 or so even a little bit slower than goal marathon pace. And then from there, slowly got into a rhythm and kind of locked in around that 6:15. And I think my last mile was like a 6:08 or something like that. So negative splits. My front half was a 122 something, and then the back half was a 121. So
Nice.
I'm a huge believer of negative splits for marathons at least. Not sure how that played in ultra,
Yeah,
but
I think they probably have a big application in ultra too. In fact, I mean, this is a bit of a interesting topic for me. I think like that's the biggest point of improvement that even the top end of the field will likely see from outside of like just the increase in talent we'll see over the next however many years. With the current kind of talent we have, the biggest leap forward I think in like times would be better pacing.
Yeah.
Because it's weird. It's like, I mean, you had that experience with the marathon where it's almost that perfect distance where it's just long enough and just fast enough at the same time. Where if you make a mistake like you did, like you really get just clapped by that thing. And
there's
it's
not enough time to
fun
make
at
it
all.
up.
Right? Yeah, it's not enough time to make it up. It's just this miserable kind of weird moderate intensity to be discomfortable in.
Yeah.
Or uncomfortable in. Whereas with ultra marathons, I feel like it's just the length of the race and the duration. It just feeds into this mindset of like it's gonna kind of suck at the end no matter what. It's hard to wrap your mind around feeling good, like like a day into a race or something like that. So I think people intuitively just think, well, I should be banking time early. And then since it's lower intensity, it's easier to accidentally bank time early. And I just think that ends up kind of burning. I think it burns mental energy. And I think what ends up happening is the way I think people can relate to this is like, you know how early in a race, if you go through like an aid station, you have like this sense of urgency and you're just like, all right, I got to get through. I got to be efficient. You do what you got to do, but you are quick and you're not wasting around any time. But then at the end, if you're fading, you're just like, you're looking for reasons to slow down and stop. You're like, oh, well, maybe I'll just go over and pick at that. Maybe. And before you know it, it's like, you were saving 3 or 4 seconds here and there in the beginning and wasting 3 or 4 minutes here and there at the end. So the way I describe it is like if you can get yourself in a position where you're actually even to negative splitting, or the way I like to look at it is like maybe like a percentage to either side of even is probably like the operating zone. And if you can stay in there, the experience at the end of the ultra is so much better. And most people just don't ever get to that because they're always positive splitting them.
Right.
And it took me forever to get to that point where I actually had a race where I raced like that. And I was like, oh, okay. I want that way.
Yeah, that was definitely my experience in my first 50 at Bighorn last summer in 2022. I went out hard. It's hard with that race too because the first 18 miles are a lot of downhill. You lose a few thousand feet, and so it's easy to run fast. But going way too fast, and then blew up my quads, and my T-band was tight and everything, and so I basically walked the last like 30K of the race just because it was just a mess of a day. Again, poor planning and poor training and all that going into it. So learn the lesson the hard way. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of negative splits, or at the very minimum, positive splits. Even splits. Is that your plan for Javelina this weekend?
Yeah. And the only caveat I'll say to that approach is, I mean, you do have courses that it's not super clear as to like what your pace is based on effort, because like you'd have a course where the first half is like significantly more difficult or easier than the second half, in which case it's like, how do you know?
Right.
But I mean, you could probably at least ballpark whether somebody is like running strong or not at the end and kind of play it out. But yeah, at Javelina, what I actually did is, so I raced it in 16 and 17, and I was just looking at my splits from that. And I had like most people consider good races there. I mean, I won it in 16, was second in 17. In 16, I set the course record at the time. But when I looked at my splits, I was like, I left a ton of time on the table there by just going too fast in the beginning.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of, I think if you even split Javelina, you probably will be slower on like loops 3 and 4 just because of the heat. If it's like even reasonably warm that day, you just have a situation where you start and it's 60 degrees, dry, perfect. And then you get to the middle of the day, like in 2016, I actually had course record temps that hit like 102 degrees.
Oh my God.
And then most years though, it's like maybe more like 90. And if you get a really lucky year, which we might have this year, actually, it's going to be in the low 80s.
Yeah.
So it gets warm enough where I think like you're probably just logistically, you're going to do a little more to make sure you're staying on top of that. And you might just be moving a little slower in general because of it. But I think it still should be pretty tight. So I had some splits at the end where I was looking at it and I'm like, yeah, I should have gone 15 seconds slower across the board here. And that probably would have saved me minute, 2 minutes per mile in certain spots at the end. And hopefully that'll be enough to make it a little faster anyway. So
yeah, I feel like the negative splits work obviously very well in like the shorter distances, like a marathon or shorter. But when you get into the ultras, like you start talking about the weather, and I'm like, yeah, if it's 40 degrees in the morning and then it's 80 degrees in the afternoon, like obviously you're gonna have probably some differences in pacing.
Yeah.
Just based on external factors. So yeah, I haven't quite learned that yet because I haven't done a race over 12 hours quite yet. So I don't know. It's tough to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and everyone's going to be a little different. I think, someone who's sort of shifted my mind on some of the pacing stuff is Camille Herron, because she's just ran some incredible races with some really lopsided splits. And then, which, you could argue, well, how much faster could she go? Which is kind of a scary thought when you see some of the performances she's put up.
Does she go out faster typically?
She goes out really fast, in my opinion. And then you'll have situations where, here's where I think she might have something that's like a really, really cool strategy that's going to be, I wouldn't say independent to her, because I think a lot of people could probably apply this, and with some luck, when you get into like the really long stuff, where she just set the world record for 48 hours not too long ago, and she actually slept, well, I don't know how much sleeping she did, but she was like her non-moving time was a lot more than you'd expect. But when she was out there moving, she was moving really quick relative to what you'd expect for something like that. So like her average pace ended up being like, I think like somewhere in the 10 and a half minute mile pace. But when she was actually like, if you look at her splits on her watch, it would have been a lot faster than that. Right. So it's like, you can make an argument, I think, like mechanically speaking, she's just so well tuned to the pace she's actually moving that it behooves her to use that. And since it's such a long mental effort, having those breaks and just knowing that you have those available to you might help her like psychologically. Right. So, it'll be interesting to see what she does when she does another one, because I think that's the only 48 hour that she completed anyway. She might have done one in the past that didn't finish, but I mean, she knocked out of the park at that one, and it looked a little different than I would have expected someone to do for 48 hours. So
how many miles did she hit?
What did she have? I think it was 270, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's insane.
10-minute pace on average for 48 hours.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So she'd probably run like 6 to 7 minute miles and then sleep periodically, basically, or take a few breaks.
It's not. So my thought with that sort of approach, where you're gonna take a hit on more non-moving time, is it would be more like kind of calculated like that. Yeah. It seems like she just does it intuitively. She kind of just like runs until it's like the body's not really functioning well anymore. Some things aren't cooperating the way I want it to. So she shuts it down for a bit, eats something, puts her legs up, and then gets back out there. And it's like, just starts grinding right away too. Yeah. It's not like, okay, I got to kind of get moving again. It's like back to the racetrack. It's like, yeah. So I think that's maybe where the difference could be. Cause I think some people are maybe less likely to have like a positive experience going from that complete stationary type position back to moving again. Yeah. Whereas she may just be like, enjoy that or prefer that a little bit more than that.
Yeah, that's hard to even sitting down for a couple of minutes and trying to get back up. Everything's tight and muscles are all locked up. And she's a little bit older, isn't she?
Yeah, I think Camille just turned 42, 41. She's 41 or 42. So yeah, she's run some fast times. She's making it look doable for sure for the older side of the sport.
That's incredible that, world records being set. It's like, I don't know. I would never imagine 40-year-olds being able to go out and do that for running.
Yeah, I think there's this, my guess with ultras is you'll be able to see, again, I think the big bulk of talent is yet to find the sport, but you have a situation, I think, where the intensity is so low relative what you could do, that you have a bit of a balance. You just like the marathon, you do have a balance of like how much foundational work have you had just from years and years of running, and then the relative experience. And, if you're doing something as long as 48 hours, I'm not sure, as long as your like body hasn't kind of broken down on you in any weird way, you could probably go for a while. What would be interesting would be somebody who's maybe a little later to running, but did a lot of sport in the youth. So their body kind of has a little bit more of less running related beat down. But they have like just like a big fitness base from prior stuff. But that might be asking a lot.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of the balance of, or it's a combination more of like time, like you said, building up a base. Like Kipchoge just, well, I guess he's now second in the world, but, had the world record and he's mid-30s roughly. But also combined with like the patience that I think is required for the long distance stuff, because I don't know. I feel like for me, the patience aspect is one of the hardest things. It's like, I'm always constantly reminding myself like my body's more than capable of doing these things. It's just, being mentally ready and mentally focused for that set amount of time. Is that something you've struggled with, or maybe early on, trying to figure out the patient side of things?
Yeah, for sure. I would say in the beginning, I looked at everything through the lens of I'll train a ton and I'll have confidence that I'm ready to do this. And there's a little bit of just like ignorance and naivety and stuff like that of just like, oh, I can do this. And then you kind of get out there and to figure it out. What I've learned though is like really the patient side of it is something that you want to practice during training as much as you do the physical side of it, and work on things like, just like holding back in a workout versus trying to have like this killer workout, or here's a big one, like on the long run development, when you get into like the race specific stuff, keeping it at race specific intensity versus running a little bit faster. Cause I mean, you're training for 100 miles or in some cases further, your long run's probably too fast for what you're going to do on race day.
Yeah.
So like we're working on that, like, all right, I just need to stay patient and kind of let this come to me. And then the other thing, just the mind game of the entire day, is an interesting one where I think you can practice during training a lot more than most people maybe realize. And it's just like kind of looking at the race itself. It's just a compressed version of your training where you're going to have good workouts, great workouts, you're going to have bad workouts, and that's how the race is going to play out too. So when those particular situations come up, don't think of them as here's my reality for the rest of the race. Think of it as, all right, this is where I am right now, but we're going to have something change soon, and then I can kind of get back to it. And that helps, I think, just chunk the race into more like manageable pieces versus where you get into trouble is when you're out there for 100 miles and you're just thinking about running 100 miles the whole time. That is just too big to wrap your head around, in my opinion. So then you end up kind of burning mental energy versus conserving it.
That's it. I definitely practiced that for Chicago, was chunking it up. I kind of use like my gels as like each little check mark, because I'm not really stopping at aid stations or the water stations during the marathon, but like doing everything in like 4 mile chunks. So I'm taking a gel every 4 miles, salt pill every 4 miles. So it's like, all right, just get from the start line to mile 4, and then we'll figure out the rest later. I've heard like people using segmentation like that in ultras of like, okay, just get to the next aid station or to the next checkpoint. I think that helps a lot, because otherwise it's so overwhelming to think of, I got 24 miles left to run at this pace. There's no way I'm going to be able to do it, but just get to the next 4 mile section, and then we'll figure it out from there. I think that helps a lot too, just that segmentation of things. Do you do cold exposure or like cold plunges or anything for like the mental strength kind of stuff?
Yeah, I do cold plunges. I don't feel like I've done them for the mental stuff. I just love the way you feel when you get out of them.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But I could see that being something that someone could do to kind of just get themselves used to. I mean, like, I think actually it's an interesting topic, because I think ultra running is one of those things where you have this situation where the physical training isn't going to be enough to really prepare your mind for what it's about to do. So like you can kind of compound the training day after day, and that's going to take care of like the physical aspect of it. But really like doing a dress rehearsal where like your mind is focused for that long, you're not going to be able to do that with the activity itself, or you're going to be doing the race essentially. So I always wonder about like just what can you do like in terms of just structuring your life so that you have opportunities to almost kind of have that like same type of stress for a long period of time, and just practice like, how do I kind of chunk things in this situation? How do I manage what I'm doing now versus thinking too far ahead, but still recognizing where I want to be? And I just think it's busyness. I think like there's a balance there, obviously, because you want to be able to execute your training and you don't want to like overextend yourself. But I think if you stay really busy, it prepares you for these longer races, because you're just used to a day that is very, very full and has a lot of things that need to be done, but you have to do them one step at a time. So, I mean, there's probably a point where you want to like relax from that so you can get ready for the race, just like a taper, maybe taper from that busy day as well as physically. So, but I think that's helped me the most. I find when I have like a lot of structure in my life and a lot of things that I'm interested in and I want to do, but they really fill me from like when I wake up to when I go to bed at night, I'm more mentally prepared for races, because it doesn't feel like it's really that stressful on my mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I mean, you do a lot like business coaching, everything else you do. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I found 2 things that I think kind of mimic that mindset late in a race where it kind of gets hard. One is the cold plunge for sure. So maybe you've graduated from that mental strength level, I guess you could say that. I feel like cold plunges for me, the first like 90 seconds are whatever part of your brain gets lit up. I think it's like your prefrontal cortex, like that decision making thing of should I get out Should I, like the fight or flight, basically. That same thing gets lit up for me in a race when it's like fight or flight. Like, do I keep fighting this and keep pushing forward, or do I just bail out and walk and DNF or whatever? So I find if I cold plunge like as consistent as possible, it kind of works that same muscle in the brain. Huh. And then the other thing too, which is odd, is like road trips. I hate road trips. And I realize this because we drive up to Wyoming every summer. I think it's like 18 hours of driving. We do the whole thing in one day. Yeah. And it's miserable. And that's kind of where I learned the segmentation thing. Is like, okay, get from here to this next like 4-hour chunk of the drive. And it's like, because the only time we drive up there is when I go up there to do the Bighorn 50. And it's like 3 days before the race. And I'm like, this is exactly how I feel when I did the ultra last year. And it's just like, that's what made me realize it's just patience. It's like, you can keep going. Your car is going to be able to keep driving on this 18-hour road trip, but like you have to be there to man it and make sure that it gets there and stay focused for those 18 hours. So it's like finding different things like that. I mean, I wouldn't, encourage anybody to just go on a road trip for that,
for the sake of it,
for the mental sake of it. But, those are the only two things I've been able to find in like everyday life that mimic that same feeling.
Yeah. Well, what you're doing there, I think, is you're identifying things. So my advice for people usually is like take inventory of what you're doing and look for those opportunities, because you'll probably find more now, like if you're looking for that and that. Yeah. Because like when you think about just how many people, if they, let's just say someone has like a typical job and they get like a project or something like that that's due in 2 weeks or whenever, and they're in their mind, they're already intuitively breaking that down. They're like, okay, I know I have to have it done by then, but that means all these different steps along the way. So then once they get to the outline of that project, they're going to just take it one chunk at a time. So they're doing these things. Right. I think what ends up happening is in life, a lot of these opportunities, there's gaps between like the starting and stopping gaps are longer. So like in a race, obviously, like you might have like that checkpoint might only be like a minute, like you're going through that aid station, or 2 minutes before you have to start back up again. So it's like, how do you kind of work on that when you have a bigger gap between that, when you might have like a full lunch break or something like that, but you can still kind of, I think, appreciate the process. And if you recognize that you're doing it that often, you start to kind of get what I think is a more positive shift in your mind, where you think like, oh, this is something I've actually practiced a bunch of times versus something I need to learn on the fly. Right. And can almost trick yourself into thinking I'm ready for this versus I'm not ready for this. And but that's all it is that kind of like when your mind goes negative, how do you bring it positive? And that endless battle until you get to the finish line. Yeah.
I mean, the mental side of running is for sure what got me into it initially and what like keeps me doing it. Because I was thinking about this the other day, like running as an activity is probably one of the most boring, simple things you can do. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. But I feel like, I don't know if I actually have ADHD or some kind of attention deficit thing, but I get so bored with things so easily that I'm always on to the next thing. But I've been running consistently, essentially every day for 5 years. And I'm like, how am I able to do this incredibly objectively boring thing for years, but all these other things, I just have to move on to the next thing. And I think it's the mental side of things that is so intriguing and like keeps me coming back, because it's like you can make infinite gains in it, basically. It's not like you can, there's no end to it, basically, which I really like. Yeah, and there's a bunch of different objectives or targets you can focus on. So it's like, you get guys like, Andy Glaze, who's got like all these different inputs that he's trying to use it for. And then there's like, guys like me who are trying to chase like, how fast can I run 100 miles? Or one of the most interesting topics that I'm looking to dive into more on the podcast in the next few months is just like this new wave of like hybrid runners, or people coming into the sport that weren't traditionally into running, and just trying to kind of hear those stories about what kind of drew you to it, what keeps you here with it. Because there's still a lot of, I think, thought with running where people were doing it when they were doing, if they were athletic at any point. I mean, we definitely have people that are running now that were like, oh, I didn't have any sports as a kid, and it's kind of like, this is maybe the one that was easiest to learn, or as adults it might be the easiest one to pick up just in general. But it's like a component of so many different sports. A lot of people were doing it, but they were doing it as a means to an end versus the actual activity itself. Or in worst case scenarios, it was like punishment. So it got like ingrained in your head as this, I'm going to avoid that at all costs. Yep. That's how I was. Yeah. It's like, a coach is going to make me run laps. Yep. So what got you interested in running in the first place? It's kind of similar to what you just described. I played sports growing up, baseball and hockey. Hockey is like my main sport. I think I was better at baseball, but for some reason I just liked hockey more. And obviously there's no running in hockey. You get that cardio aspect. It's like a very like power based kind of sport, like very gritty. It's like you go in these short bursts. Mm-hmm. Like the average shift during a hockey game is like 45 seconds. So it's, like 1 or 2 laps around a track essentially, or I guess that'd be about a lap. And yeah, I loved hockey, but knew I wasn't going to be able to play it forever. And I played for 2 years in college at the University of Wyoming, just like club level. Mm-hmm. Loved it, and then just realized that there's other things I should probably focus on and things that are going to make me better. And so when my girlfriend and I were doing an exchange program in Hawaii, so we were living over there for about 9 months, and I had heard of David Goggins on Joe Rogan's podcast, and thought this guy was just crazy, but I loved his approach to like the mental strength side of things, and for whatever reason I was just like really interested in like exploring my mind, I guess, as for lack of a better term, at that point in my life. And I was like, man, I feel like running could be such a good tool to see what else I could do, because I was done playing sports, I was in school, but I was like, I'm just going to the gym every day, kind of like lackluster, lifting weights, not really with any intention behind it. So I want like more purpose behind this. And so started getting into running. I would literally go out and try and set a new mile PR every day, because I had the only baseline knowledge I had of running was I did the mile in 7th grade, and I ran, I think it was 7:12. And so now fast forward to college, I'm 19, 20 years old. And I was like, okay, as long as I can beat this 7:12 mile every day, I think I'll be doing good. And so I would just go out, 7 minutes, 6:58. I got it down to like maybe like 6:30 or something, which is crazy because my marathon time is faster than that. Marathon pace. And I did that for a while, and then I was listening to Goggins and trying to learn more about the whole running side of things. And I would hear people talk about like 100-milers and ultras. And I'm like, how are these people running for this far and like not getting burnt out? Because all I knew was I was just running as hard as I could for a mile. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, I think if I want to go farther, I'm going to have to slow down. And so I started running like 8-9 minute miles. I was like, oh, this is a lot more boring, but I can go farther. So that was the whole basically first year of running. I don't think I ever broke a double-digit run for maybe the second year of running. So just really eased into it from there. And then my friend in Wyoming asked me if I wanted to run this race. It was a 12-hour endurance challenge in our hometown in Wyoming. And basically it started at 6:30 p.m., went till 6:30 a.m., around this 8-mile loop in the mountains, and you just did as many loops as you could. And we were like, we could probably do like 50 miles in 12 hours, right? Like people do 124 hours. Why not 50 and 12? So we went in and did that. Didn't train for it whatsoever. I was doing like maybe 10 miles a week at the time. So very undertrained. And I think I ended up doing 43 miles. Oh, nice. So not bad for not training.
No kidding. That's a month's worth of training at that time.
And I was like, man, what could I do if I actually trained for this and put in the right intentional kind of work? And that was back in 2020, so about 3 years ago now. And ever since then, I've gotten kind of obsessed with just learning more about the sport, learning how to fuel properly, how to pace properly, how to structure a workout, how to structure a training plan, and all that kind of stuff. And did a few half marathons in there, did a couple 5Ks, did my first marathon like 18 months ago, and I did my 5th marathon just 2 weeks ago. So I'm just full in, all obsessed with it now.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think that, you mentioned David Goggins. I think between David Goggins, Cam Hanes, and Nick Bear, like more non-traditional runners have come into the sport in the last few years because of those 3 guys. And there's probably other ones too that are good examples, but it's just like, I look at those guys because it's like, running, it's like anything, right? It's like people look at him like, oh, well, that's a runner, or that's, and I think running as a sport has tried to like break that stigma for the longest time, where it's like, you don't have to look like, the guys standing on the Olympic starting line to run. Like, in fact, you can go out and do that at any size or at any like ability level, essentially. It's just this activity that you can do, and obviously you can progress to a point where maybe you end up looking like one of those guys, but to a large degree, I think it was kind of just like anything where like, I guess if I looked at like, in football, like in high school, you look around, it's like, okay, well, I'm probably not going to be great there unless maybe I'm good at like punting or like cornerback or something like that. So it's like I think you get a lot of like just like kind of same type of an attitude about it. But then when someone looks at someone like Goggins or Cam Hanes or Nick Bear, they're like, oh, those guys don't look like they'd be runners. They look like they'd be doing something else. But here they are running not just out jogging, but running like 240-mile races and things like that. So then people start wondering like, oh, well, maybe surely I can do the 5K, and then that leads to the marathon. And then before you know it, they're signing up for a 200-miler.
Yep. That's exactly what hooked me in, was like, especially somebody like Goggins, just learning more about his story, how he was like a nobody, not, naturally super athletic or gifted by any means. But just like got obsessed with it and stuck with it, and like proved that through time and consistency and intentionality, you can like do a 100-mile race or a 240-mile race. And I think the cool thing with him or Nick or Cam Hanes is like, none of these guys are winning these races. It's like they're not breaking records or doing anything, like noteworthy outside of just finishing the race. And I think that's really intriguing to me too, for the sport of running, because for like me playing team sports, it was always about winning. Like everything had to be winning. You got to win state this year. You got to be the top leader on the team. All this stuff is much more competitive against other people. But the cool thing with running, I think that's why it probably attracts so many people too, is that it's like it's you versus you.
Going to war with your mind.
That's all it is. Is it's never about like, can I beat this guy, or can I maybe for you it might be because you're winning the races and you're going for that. But for like an average Joe like me, it's like you don't have to be winning or being an elite person to actually like enjoy the sport.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that this episode's sponsors are Element Electrolytes and Delta G Ketones. You can get a free sample pack of Element Electrolytes by going to drinklmnt.com/HPO and 20% off your order of Delta G Ketones by going to deltagketones.com and entering promo code BITTER20. Well, I think the interesting thing about ultra running is it's sort of like kind of welds those worlds together to a degree, because like you said, there's the competitive side of the sport, but you can still have the biggest events in the sport and you're lined up with everyone's lined up together. And there's always been this kind of weird thing, and you'll experience this when you do it's the Wyoming 100-mile you signed up for in October?
Yeah, it's the Bighorn 100.
Bighorn, yeah. So so like you have this experience where like you go 100 miles, and everything that there's this weird disconnect that you can have someone that's done a bunch of them tell you everything about it, and there's an element that won't click until you actually do it yourself, because you'll be able to pin everything they told you to actual experiences for yourself. And then there's like this little thing in your mind that when you talk to someone else who's done it, that they've experienced that too, and you both kind of know like no one else will relate to this unless they do it too. So it's almost like this like club that that it doesn't matter if you're the last person across the finish line or the first person across the finish line. There's that camaraderie of knowing like, oh, I know what you went through. You know what I went through. And it really doesn't matter who crossed the finish line first.
There's a real mutual respect with running. And I think at least of all the communities I've been a part of, running is the most inclusive and encouraging of everybody. And I think that's, again, one of the greatest things about it is like you can be somebody like yourself, an elite runner, but you're still interested to hear my story of just some average guy. And it's so cool because, again, there's that mutual respect of like, I tell like athletes that I coach now too, is like, even though we're not running elite times or winning these races, like you're still putting your body through the same thing. And so whether or not you're doing it in the same amount of time as this other person, like you're still doing the same thing, like relatively speaking. And so I think that's always an important thing to note too, is like, I try to train and live like a professional athlete, even though I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not winning races or, sponsored by these big companies that are paying me to go fast. It's just like, but I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just doing the same thing, but
yeah. It's interesting, and you can, because it's like the barrier to entry is pretty low for the most part. I mean, there's obviously like expenses, and you can spend a ton of money on running if you want to, but like in terms of just like getting that experience we described, you can do that pretty easily in most cases. So yeah, it's interesting. Let's talk a little about your training for Chicago. I'm curious kind of how you prepared for that. Did you have like a timeline where you're like, okay, this day is the day I start preparing?
Sort of. It was basically the day I finished the Bighorn 50 miler in June, because that would be from June to October was, I guess, about 4 months. So as soon as I got recovered from that, started getting right into marathon training. I think it was probably a week or two after. So it was a good, I think, 14-week block. But I actually, which I don't know if this helped or not. I mean, it worked obviously, but I had, I think, 3 friends that I went and paced for ultra marathons. One of them was Pierce at Tahoe 200, one for a friend in Leadville, and then another friend at the Crazy Mountain Ultra in Montana. And so that was 3 or 4 weekends where I would miss my long training runs and substitute it with like 12 hours in the mountains, just hiking and a little bit of running, but a lot of like power hiking and just spending a lot of time on my feet. And I feel like that helped a lot. Obviously, that's not part of a traditional marathon training program to go spend 12 hours in the mountains on a Saturday, but I feel like that probably helped from like a muscular endurance standpoint, and just, I think mentally too, just shifting the perspective of like, okay, I just spent 12 hours hiking through the mountains. I can go knock out 2 hours and 45 minutes mentally. It's so short compared to those things. But yeah, from a physical standpoint, I think that probably helps. But yeah, I worked with a coach. His name's Will Nation. He's based here in Austin. Do you know him at all?
I've met Will, but I know who he is, I think.
Yeah, he's crazy fast. I think he's like a 2:13 marathoner, like OTQ guy. Crazy fast, super knowledgeable. But yeah, he put together the plan for me. It was Monday was always about an hour to an hour 15 easy run, zone 2. Tuesday was typically a speed workout from like 10 to 13 miles generally. A lot of kind of alternate every week, like intervals, like 1K, 1 mile repeats, and then mixing in like 3, 4, 5 mile tempos. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday was all easy miles, just zone 2 training. And then Saturday, early on in the training, was a lot of just long, easy miles, like anywhere from 14 to 18 miles generally. And then sprinkled in throughout that. And then as we got closer to the race, was more of the like marathon pace workouts on those Saturday long runs. So I think my peak workout, or the last 3 weeks leading into before the taper, was it went like 20 miles, 22 miles, and then 20 miles, and then a 2-week taper. And for me, I think those Saturday like weekend long run workouts with like 20 miles with marathon paces built in, those are for sure the biggest needle movers for me. Like that's where I really can tell the biggest difference in fitness and confidence too, I think, because there's, not a lot of times in training you actually get up to that 20-mile mark or further at marathon pace. So from a mental standpoint, those help a lot. And then obviously physically just getting used to turning your legs over 20 miles into a workout at marathon pace.
Knowing they still work at that point.
Yeah.
And from a time perspective, you get pretty close to your actual goal time then. So you're really it's a really good like dress rehearsal. And like you said, it convinces you. And, I bet the longer days out there crewing and pacing were probably helpful mostly mentally, I would imagine. I remember when I was still just doing 50 milers. I hadn't done a 100 miler yet, but I'd done a few 50 milers. So I kind of got used to the routine of that. And I was starting to normalize kind of the experience of that duration of time. And then I went on this bike trip where like we were biking, I think for like 3 or 4 days. And it was like, one day was like 14 hours. And none of it was hard. It was just like we had a bunch of heavy gear and we were just barely moving. And it was just kind of like just an exercise in patience and normalizing being out there, kind of trudging along on these bikes. So like I remember when I did that 50 miler, then I remember looking back thinking like that went by so much faster than any of the other ones did. And the big difference was that bike trip thing was like maybe like I think 6 weeks before. So it's still relatively fresh in my mind in terms of like, how long could I stay focused on a single task? So you do normalize stuff with that. And and you were out on some crazy courses, so there's probably just some muscular strength going up and down.
Yeah, I mean, some of those mountains are gnarly. Specifically, I mean, Leadville's pretty intense with Hope Pass, but that Crazy Mountain one in Montana, I think this is the second or third year they've done it, but it's a relatively new course, but it was gnarly. There's some, I mean, just like sheer faces you're hiking up, and you're like, oh my gosh, we got to hike up that thing, and it requires so much patience, and that's why I'm just continuously reminded with this running stuff until I can hit my genetic plateau, wherever that might be. I'm just reminded that it's so much mental training that has to go into it, and so much mental patience, because it's like, again, during a marathon, it's that fight or flight response. It's like every second your mind's telling you to stop running. You just keep fighting that, and the more you do it, the more time you spend in that discomfort, the the better you can be at it. And so just learning that as long as you put in the training and you get those physical adaptations, like then it becomes such a mind game.
Yeah, for sure. So you're thinking of adding one more race to the schedule this year, it sounds like.
Yeah, I just signed up for the Brazos Bend 100K. I had Pierce. I've talked about him 8 times on the podcast.
Yeah.
He's a terrible influence. He's doing the 100-mile version, and he's got a whole bunch of people he's like talking into doing the 100 miles. And I want to do the 100 miles, but for sentimental reasons, I'm saving that for Bighorn to do my first 100 miler there. So just doing the 100K at Brazos. From what I know, it's very flat, fast, super runnable. I know you won it last year, right?
Yeah, so that course is interesting. So like you were talking about before, weather is probably the biggest determinant of whether that is just like as fast as you're going to find or a little bit slower. So the course itself is just like, it's basically town lake, like hard packed dirt, like super flat. Like there's this one little spot where like it would, to say it's even, I mean, you only notice it because everything else is so pancake flat, and it's like maybe like 20 meters long, and it's like you can kind of see the top of, you can see over it, so it's really not even a hill. It just becomes like this joke essentially about like, oh, that's the steepest climb on the course.
It's probably a good reprieve though, a little bit, right? Like
yeah, some variation,
different muscles for a second.
Yeah, and just a spot to kind of like look forward to, or that stands out on the course a little bit. But yeah, I think if it's like not bad weather, like here's where you can run into issues with that course. If it rains a ton the days leading in, it can turn a lot muddier, in which case then you go from like, oh, I could wear like a pair of super shoes to I probably need something that's gonna like shed the loose dirt here, and then you're just moving a lot slower. It's like hard to go chase PRs and stuff in that. And then the other one is just the humidity. So like last year, it was such an interesting scenario. We had a 3-day stretch where it was 80 degrees and humid one day, 70 degrees and humid. And when I say humid, it's like almost 100%. And then there was like a storm that was going to blow out all the humidity, and it was 60 degrees and cool on one of the other 3. So we're like, where's that 3-day rotation going to land? And it landed on the 70 and humid. So it was pretty rough humidity wise. So like you might get some humid weather. You could get rain and mud, but if it's not like that, it's a really fast course. So you kind of just got to be open to, this will either be something where I can like really chase a fast time, or it's gonna be something where I just need to kind of like challenge myself on the day, because there's gonna be some variables there that are gonna slow things down a little bit. But generally speaking, like if you're feeling up to doing a race, I love moving from the marathon into something like 100K or even a 100-miler for that matter. Because the way I like to look at like training for an ultra marathon is everything that you would do for a marathon or for any endurance event from a speed work standpoint is still important. It's just an order of operations thing.
Right.
So from you going into, we can talk about your Bighorn training if you want, but my guess is with that, you were probably doing a lot more low intensity volume leading into the race itself. And then you recover from that, you get into speed work fairly soon after that, because the marathon is going to be the kind of the next thing on the schedule. That's kind of how I would structure a training plan for 100K or 100 mile. There'd be a period where we're just working on base, and we're trying to just get you really, really fast at like everything underneath your aerobic threshold, or like the point I like to measure is just below the aerobic threshold. How fast can we get you there? And then from there, we're going to drop a speed work development phase on it and try to pull that whole system up a little bit. And then with that, just like really high level of just overall fitness, then we drop the race day specific stuff on top of it. So like everything you do that's at race day intensity is just going to feel relatively easier, and you're going to be able to do probably more of it, higher quality amounts of it, and really kind of work on that. So you're kind of like inadvertently did that whole first phase of the plan, and now you're just at this point where with the time left, you want to get as specific as you can to what you'll be doing for that 100K. And the biggest question you probably want to ask yourself is like, what is the kind of the goal pace or intensity for that, so that you can kind of start feeling out what that feels like in training.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out. I think, I mean, this is actually a good question for you to find like aerobic threshold. I know there's testing you can do like in a lab, obviously, but would the heart rate probably be the next best thing? Yeah,
there's a bunch of different ways you can try to kind of calculate it. Like you can go kind of 70 to 80% of your max heart rate, can kind of ballpark it. I'll oftentimes, if you know your lactate threshold, or you can do a field test to gauge that a little easier because it's not as long of a workout. You can go maybe 20, 30 beats per minute below that is another way to maybe gauge it. And then, like you said, you can go to a lab and they'll tell you exactly where it is. generally speaking, I like to try to like ballpark it with like the field test or a percentage of your max heart rate if you have that data, and then from there stress test it in the field. So really what we're looking at with that is like once you get out there, the one way to do it is like start really slow and then gradually speed up and just kind of target either like breathing in your nose and out your mouth, like nasal breathe. And once you get to a point where that's not really feeling like you can really sustain that, that's probably the spot where you're getting pretty close to it. The other one is like if we were to have this conversation like we are right now while we're running, if you'd have no problem having this conversation with me, you're below your aerobic threshold most likely, versus like you got to a point where like we're talking and when it's your turn to say something, you're like, you just barely get out like 5 or 6 words. Then we're definitely in a moderate intensity for you and past that aerobic threshold. So I like to ballpark it with heart rate, then kind of like stress test it with some of those that talk test or that breathing test, and then kind of start working around that to some degree and kind of go from there.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I know, do you ever use like the Maffetone method? Is that accurate, you think?
You can,
roughly.
That's another one you could add to the ballpark figure. The hard part with age adjusted heart rates is sometimes they're just like, they can be pretty wildly wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, any of those things can be wrong as well. So what I like to think about is like, the more of those things you have kind of like speaking to one another, the better. So like if all of those things are lining up, then chances are you're probably heading in the right direction. And then if we took you into the lab, it'd probably test, oh yeah, we're right in there.
Right.
And it is a range to a degree too. So it's like a lot of it is like the real harm there is like if you thought for one reason or the other that your aerobic threshold was a degree faster than it actually was, you're in the moderate intensity at that point, which is, there's nothing wrong with moderate intensity training. It's just an opportunity cost thing where you're going to get more volume in that lower. The way I look at it is if you look at easy, moderate, hard, there's value across that entire spectrum, but it's all opportunity costs, and you want to make sure you're taking advantage of the right opportunities at the right time. So there's a time where, like, let's say you got your aerobic threshold, and it may be in a really good spot right now based on your marathon training, because your marathon pace is probably between your aerobic threshold and your lactate threshold.
Right.
So that's another thing you could probably get pretty close with just using that data too. But like generally speaking, like if we really want to improve your aerobic threshold and we're taking opportunities to practice that off the table by doing too much moderate or high intensity stuff, it's tough because you're trading in like usually multiple days of that for one or two of those higher quality sessions.
Right.
Versus a scenario where,
sense.
if your aerobic threshold's at a point where it's like plateaued, and it's like unless you add more volume, we need to change. We had to add another a stressor to like kind of move the needle on things. Then the opportunity cost to do a moderate or high intensity thing is really low, because any input's going to sustain that for the most part.
Right.
And then we can actually improve something else while maintaining that. So it's all kind of just like, where's the global fitness at? And then what are the inputs we need to do right now? And then there's a specificity thing too. So like right now, regardless of where that's at, you're probably doing lower intensity stuff now anyway, because that's just going to happen to be what the 100K intensity will be. Right. But yeah, generally speaking, if you get great weather, I mean, you could probably like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 60 to 90 seconds slower than your marathon pace, I wouldn't think would be like extremely aggressive.
That's kind of what I was thinking. So marathon pace was 6:15, and even like if I go out for like an easy run, just by myself, it's typically like trying to stay using like Maffetone method or following heart rate. It's typically around like 8 minutes a mile generally. So I was doing the math. I was like, I think I could probably hold 8 minutes a mile for 100K if I needed to. And I was thinking about that. I was like, man, that's gonna require a lot of patience.
Yeah. If the weather's nice and the course is dry, I would say 8 is probably a relatively conservative bet based on your marathon PR. And I mean, I think conservative is the way to go with something like that, because there's so much time to make up for it. Where like if you get 50K in and you're just like, let's say you come through 50K and you're right on 8 minute pace and you're just kind of still waiting to get started, then you're in a great spot. And then you can start kind of walking it down if you want to. So
yeah, that's kind of the plan, just because I've never done anything like this. I've done one marathon where it was just strictly based off of feel. And that's probably a little bit too fast there, but I've never done anything longer than like a 20-mile easy aerobic run. So definitely new territory, but I'm very excited to test it out and see.
The other thing,
and I mean, you're the man for the job to help me do it.
Here's what I think you should try doing. So the input that I think is, I think generally speaking, the most important aspect is quality, or the most volume you can tolerate at the highest quality at the intensity that you're focusing on right now. So like there's a ton of different ways you could distribute that volume. You could do 20 runs in a week, 3 a day if you wanted to, and distributing it like, you know, in a way that it was like just really like, that's an extreme obviously. Or you could distribute it where you're doing like 3 days running like really long. The risk to that obviously is like quality is likely going to have a harder time being sustained if you're just putting it all into one group. And then it's just like logistically kind of a nightmare to do it the other way.
Right.
So usually people are going to fall somewhere in between those two, like undoable extremes essentially. But that's like the way I explain it is that's priority one, is maintaining quality at the highest amount of volume you can tolerate, because that's going to move the needle on performance the most. And then from there, I think it's how do you actually distribute it in a way that works for your schedule? That's probably one of the biggest ones for most people, is like most people have a schedule and they have non-negotiables that are you can't avoid. So usually that comes in the framework of two different things. How much time does that actually add up to in terms of availability? And then where are those available times? And then we start building from there. So with most people, it's going to be some sort of situation where it's probably not an even spread over the week, because they're probably going to have like a weekend where maybe they can go out and do a long run, or maybe 2 long runs, in which case we're going to probably skew some of that volume and work on race day specific stuff there. For someone like yourself, the other advantage of that too would be, let's say we decided on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 3 hours each, and just target that 8-minute mile pace. You could probably just head down to Town Lake. That'd be a pretty similar course profile to Brazos, and just kind of sense out how that feels on that second day. Like if you get to that end of that third hour on the second day and you're still feeling like, all right, I mean, I kind of feel like I should run a little faster than this. This is feeling like, you know, then I think it's a really realistic goal.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Wonder from a volume standpoint. So like for Chicago, I think my peak was around 65 miles, with probably 20% of those miles being like high intensity, maybe 15% being high intensity. So I don't know, just say like 55 miles of the 65 were probably just aerobic runs. Do you think maybe bump that up to like 60, 70 miles a week? Like keep that same running volume as a whole, but just more time spent aerobically?
Yeah, so the way I like to look at this is it's the biggest, because all these inputs are just leading to your training load. So like when you're training for the marathon, the mileage you were doing had, you had the low intensity inputs, but then you had a lot of moderate to higher intensity inputs too that increased that training load. So you can do more volume if you remove some of that training load in the moderate to high intensity, which with your time frame between now and December, it's short enough where I think you should probably like abstain from moderate to high intensity as much as possible.
Okay.
In exchange for more mileage.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and just get really specific. Like you don't have to like remove it altogether, but you could do a super minimal input. Like if you wanted to do like an abbreviated short interval session, or you're probably better off with like a lactate threshold type thing. So like more like a long interval, but you could do that intensity with short intervals if you wanted to, just to kind of keep that leg turnover there and kind of minimal input, sustain some of that fitness to some degree. But I think like, the big thing is probably convincing yourself that 8 is like an achievable goal. So you go in there positive as much as anything.
That makes sense.
I don't necessarily love runs beyond 3 hours unless like you're going to practice race day specific stuff. So sometimes the way I'll look at that is like, let's do a couple longer runs. It wouldn't have to be back-to-back days either. I think you should maybe do that once or twice just to kind of get a feel for how you feel on that second day and get an idea of just like, oh yeah, the perspective of knowing you can move a tired body is helpful, because then you know that it's mental when you get that tired body at some point and you're like, can I do this? Can I not? And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. On that Sunday morning, I did 3 hours on tired legs. I know I can do this. I just got to fuel and hydrate and stay focused. So like, I like to think of that as like a good value add from the mental standpoint. And 3 hours isn't so long that we're like at a point where like the margin of diminishing returns have been met to the degree where like now you're just kind of out there like getting low quality for the input and then taking future training off the table in a large degree, the way it would if I sent you out for like a 6-hour solo run, in which case then you're probably taking the next day off. The day after that's probably going to be like really low quality, if not another day off. And then by the time you get around to wanting to run again, we'll probably have missed training to the degree where even if that 6 hours was done at the quality we were looking for, you could have done more than that in that time frame and got better cumulative volume at that goal intensity.
Yeah, I incorporated a little bit more of those back-to-back sessions for my 50 miler for earlier this year, and that made a huge difference. And again, with confidence too, of just like knowing what it's like to run another 3 hours the following day after you just did 3 hours yesterday. It's a huge confidence boost for sure. And it, I'm sure from a physical standpoint, obviously it teaches your body to recover faster and not break down so quickly. So this is very helpful.
Well, and then practicing fueling too.
Yeah.
Like, because we could talk about that. I actually listened to your podcast from Chicago. I think you were super dialed. You got clearly practiced it, and it worked great. I would say now 100K isn't that much further or longer in the sense that I think you would have to deviate too much. But since the intensity is a little lower, you might just want to, and if you have perspective from this with the 50 miler, I would say trust that over anything I'm about to tell you.
Right.
But you might be able to do just a little less fuel and avoid potentially just feeling like you're kind of putting in a lot. Because you probably felt fine in just under 3 hours, but if you start going up, you might feel like you're putting a lot down the hatch, so to speak.
100%. And it is when you're aerobic, you're primarily fat burning, correct?
Yeah. So if you don't cross your aerobic threshold, which you probably won't for the race, not in any meaningful way anyway. I mean, you could, I guess, but you won't spend a lot of time there. But you're looking at at worst, probably a 50-50 split from fats and carbohydrates. And that would be someone on a moderate to moderate high carbohydrate diet. So when you think about that, the inputs you're going to need at that point with good glycogen stores heading into it isn't going to probably be as much as it would need to be if you were running at an intensity where that's starting to skew really heavily towards carbohydrate.
Right.
And the marathon is one of the more oxygen demanding events out there. So it's one of those where there's just no way around it. You want to try to get in almost as much carbohydrate as you can get in.
You're right.
And tolerate. So
that was actually one thing from Chicago. I think I only got down, I think I mentioned this in that podcast, I think I only got down 3 gels. My plan was to do a total of 5 throughout the race, so I missed 2 of them basically. I completely just spit one up because it was it was not going down. That was at mile 12, I want to say. And then another one at mile 18. So I got that one down. I tried to take another one at 22, and I was just mad and threw the gel on the ground. But from my last gel was 18, so the last 8 miles, basically the last 50 minutes, I didn't have any fuel or no extra fuel, I suppose, which I guess because you can use your glycogen stores for about an hour to an hour and a half typically.
Yeah, it'll depend. So the way to think about that is, you'll have a situation where once you start dipping below 50%, that's when your body starts ratcheting up the perceived effort, and that's when you start noticing why does it feel so much harder to run this pace? But yeah, you're probably looking at if you're doing some fueling, you're probably looking at closer to 2 hours before you start. Because I thought you were eating more. I might have been remembering that wrong. Because if you only did 3 gels over the course of the marathon, you might actually want to do a little bit more than that for the.
That was the goal, yeah.
Yeah. So even for the 100K, just because first of all you're gonna have a lot easier time doing it,
right?
Because the intensity is so much lower. It's just so much easier to get in fuel when you're running that slow versus trying to.
Yeah, it wasn't even in my stomach. It was just my mouth. It wasn't,
really?
Because I was breathing so hard and my heart rate was so high that
just the logistics of it.
It was, I don't know I think it was a mental thing more than anything. Because I don't know. I think I just was sick of the Morton gels too, maybe. I used them so much during training that I was like, I got to take another one of these things. It could have been that, but I don't know.
You did drop a 6:08 at the end though. So
that's true.
It's probably unlikely that you were too depleted at that point.
That's true. Yeah.
You did a really thorough job of loading up before the race though, so you probably went in about as topped off as you could get to, which just that's just something you don't have to do during the race then as much of, because you have it already there.
Do you need say for Brazos, if I'm just saying I'm going to be 100% aerobic, would I need to carb load as intensely? Because I was doing 600 grams per day for 3 days.
Oh, it's a good question. Yeah, so I don't think it hurts to do that. Where you might want to deviate is the morning of. So the way to think about it is you'll eat dinner the night before or whatever your last food is. Then you have this overnight fast essentially. So your body is going to increase its fat oxidation rates to some degree just from not eating for that period of time. So you wake up in the morning with like this like opportunity to kind of maintain that or accelerate it a little bit more. So the way I like to think about it is when you get into the ultra stuff is you can still eat the carbohydrates those days leading in if you're looking to kind of top off your liver and muscle glycogen. But then in the morning, I think you might want to stay away from too much carbohydrate there and just kind of keep those higher fat oxidation rates so that when you start the race, your body's encouraged to burn fat, even though you have those stock glycogen stores. And then if you wait a little bit into the race to start fueling, you'll have kind of ratcheted that stuff up a little bit more yet. And then you're just not going to fight as big of a ratio of carbs to fats for the remainder of that day.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I know that you're interviewing me technically. I would ask you a bunch of questions.
That's totally fine.
But I talked to Mike McKnight about this, and he tends to do gels or like the artificial, like a drink mix or something earlier on in the race, and then progressively move towards like solid foods. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think there's some good starting points, and there's going to be like a bunch of individual stuff. So like I would say the number one thing for pretty much anyone to start with is think of like a combination of like fluids, gels, and solid foods. So you sort of have like a contrast there. Then from there, think about with hydrating and fueling, nibbling and sipping. So the more you can do small amounts spread out, the better from both a fluid and an intake standpoint. So I think people run into more issues when they are taking in like large quantities at once. And then they've got kind of this gut bomb of just like, now my body's got to shunt a bunch of blood to the digestive tract to kind of process that when you're trying to also get oxygen to your muscles. And if it's warm, also cooling. So it's like we have this finite resource and now you're asking me to do that too, type of a thing.
Right.
And the way to think about it is if you keep moving, your body's not going to stop sending blood to your legs for the oxygen delivery. Your body's not going to stop cooling because you'd pass out if it did that. It can shut down your digestive though. So then if you do too much, that's where people will get kind of an upper GI issue where it sort of just stops that process and everything just kind of sits in there. So I would say like to some degree, like I like to be a little more kind of like less polarizing where I'm doing all of one and then all of the other and just kind of go back and forth. Because I think that also helps with palate fatigue too. So you guys said like you got sick of the Morton gel.
Yeah.
So what I'll notice that with long races, if I'm doing something like liquid and sweet flavored, after a while you're just like,
Right.
So I'll have something like crunchy, salty, savory to kind of like cleanse the palate, so to speak. Or the extreme way to think about it, if you ever watched the Man versus Food stuff. Yeah. So there's that one where he was doing like an ice cream sundae challenge. And he was like tapping out, and then he brought over like some crispy, salty French fries, and he ate some of those. All of a sudden, it like reset his appetite signals, and he could start eating the ice cream again.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So it's kind of like just kind of keeping yourself almost interested enough to continue the process. You'll learn some stuff about yourself too, where there'll be points in the race where it's just like it just feels better to like sip on some calories, or I'm craving some salt or something crunchy, and then you just kind of want that. So you can definitely kind of lean into your intuitions a little bit during those points in time too.
Yeah, it seems like it's a good idea to have a baseline of something to try and go off of, and then from there personalize it to whatever for whatever you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense though.
What I do remember listening to, and this is maybe what I was thinking about versus the race itself, was during your training sessions, you were doing a really good job of fueling during them. It seemed like.
Yeah, I tried to simulate race day as much as I can. Like wake up around the same time I'll be getting up on race morning, try and start the run if I can around the same time that the race would start, just to get like used to eating those foods early in the morning. Like usually it's really hard to get solid food and stuff like that down in the morning. So getting used to that, and then just going through the motions and making sure I have a good solid plan going into the race. Just because again, my very first marathon, I didn't do any of that. I just was like buying gels the week of the race. I was like, oh, this should be fine, right? And so I think that helps me a lot, is just again from a mental standpoint of getting all the ducks in a row during training and dialing that in and just simulating race day as much as possible. And then I like to experiment with a lot of things as much as I can too throughout training. Like for some of the long runs, I would just do liquid calories before the run, and then the next week I would just do solid calories, and then figure out different ways, like how my body would react to that, or what was easier to get down if I'd noticed any differences during training. And then, over a 14-week period, I was able to slowly through process of elimination, get rid of things that I didn't like and just lock in on those ones that seemed to work every time I used them. That seemed to help quite a bit for me too.
Yeah, I would definitely lean on that.
Yeah.
So you've sort of done like usually when I get to the long run development phase of training for an ultra marathon, I'll start kind of bringing more food into the workouts and stuff, and I'll be just exactly what you said, practicing what I want to do on race day and try to figure out like, all right, let's reconfirm what was gonna work from this time from the last time, just make sure everything is still like humming along the way I expect it to. And then, sometimes it's just like I'm gonna try something a little different. So a lot of times my solid food thing will range from one race to the next. So I'll get interested in one thing or the other for a specific race, and then I'll just kind of put that input in there during those long runs so I'm practicing. But it sounds like you've been doing that, and that'll just be something you might want to play. Although depending on, I know you did some long runs with Gold Marathon pace in there too, but if you did just some like non-marathon paced long runs, that might be a pretty good perspective from a relatively close intensity, kind of how those products are going to sit in your stomach for something like Brazos. Or if they sat well during that, it was probably a little faster yet. So then they'll be, at least in the beginning, pretty rock solid, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I've over the years started to get better at doing solid foods. When I first started getting into running, and I would try and incorporate solid foods, but it would not happen. And then over time, I've become more acclimated to getting solid foods in, and I feel like it gives me more energy to it. I mean, it's probably more calories, obviously. So if I can get in solid foods, it seems like a big help. I haven't spent probably enough time figuring out exactly what solid foods are the best. I mean, outside of like aid station quesadillas or something like that, those usually sit pretty good. But yeah, I've liked incorporating a little bit more of that. And so for Brazos, I don't know what the aid stations are like there, but I'm sure they have a lot of that.
They've got a ton of stuff. Yeah, that's actually a good point, because one thing I'll sometimes do when there's a race, when the race has been determined and you're starting to think about this stuff, is actually look and see what they have on their aid station on the website. Because if there's stuff there that it's like, if you're kind of like indifferent, it's just like, I've got a lot of options I could try and I'm not really feeling too compelled to pick one or the other, you may as well pick stuff they have on the aid station table, because then it's logistically you're going to have access to it the whole time.
Does that course, I think this is the first year they've done the 100K.
I think so, yeah.
But do you know, it's a looped course, I think, right? You do several loops?
Yeah, so it is, what is it? It's like 16 and 2/3 miles or something like that. So you'd probably do four of them about. Okay. Or maybe I think it's six. Maybe it's just a shade over 16 or something like that.
Is it kind of a similar setup to like Rocky Raccoon?
Yeah, it's a lot like that.
Okay, so there's like one kind of main hub people can hang out in, and then aid stations throughout.
Yeah, and the aid stations are really easy to get to too. Nice. So yeah.
Nice. I'm super excited. This is like, I've only done a couple ultras, and those are very different from this, much more mountainous. So it took a lot longer and a lot more hiking, I think. But this, I'm excited because it's just so new to me. I've never done a race where I can run the whole thing and it's this long.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it goes by faster because you're moving quicker.
Yeah.
But then you are kind of just hitting that same mechanic over and over again. So like that is something where it's like, and that's where the kind of the back-to-back long run will be helpful, just to kind of feel like, how does my body actually feel moving at this pace when it's kind of been getting hit by that same kind of pace and mechanic for a bit.
Did you wear super shoes when you did yours last year?
I did. I wore the Ultra Vanish Carbon.
Okay. That's one thing I'm want to try and figure out, so I can spend as much time training in that type of shoe. I don't know if I'd wear carbon shoes for a lot of long runs, but at least have an idea for what I'll wear, because I guess, like you said, it could be a game time decision based on what the course conditions are.
Yeah. If it's dry, then I think you're probably fine with a super shoe, and that probably would be a preferable one. So.
Yeah, because I had again Pierce. He ran it last year, and he said, I think he wore the Hoka Speed Goats, because I asked him, I was like, "Are you gonna wear road shoes for this?" And he's like, "I wore the Speed Goats last year because there's like one rocky section." But I was like, I don't know. I'm curious what your take is on this rocky section he speaks about.
That's funny. Yeah, I would say like on a course like that, like, and for most courses actually, whatever shoe's the most comfortable on your foot is probably going to be the move, just because you're out there for longer. Yeah. So you want something that's going to feel pretty natural on your foot.
That makes sense. And then did you just do like a handheld bottle and swap it out like with another one, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I had handhelds pretty much the whole way, and the way it's set up is you have like kind of start finish area, but like the other aid stations are just like a mile drive away. It's kind of like it's not like a loop. It's just like this weird kind of like small loops that all kind of like mesh together, so to speak. And there's one kind of a little bit longer out and back too.
Okay.
So like you can get access to bottles, and the aid stations aren't that far apart either. So your best bet probably, even if like you're totally uncrewed, you could probably be better. You just find probably carrying a handheld and just filling up at each aid station.
Did you do it alone last year? Like, or was Nicole out there with you?
She was out there,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm actually probably gonna be out there this year. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, I've got a couple of coaching clients that are racing it this year. So I can throw some bottles at you.
Yeah, I might need it. I'm gonna try and talk Bree into going over there with me, but
Cool.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited to try all these logistics out because it's all so new. And again, that's the cool thing with running is like you can run a fast marathon, or you could do a 100-miler through the mountains, or you can do a fast ultra. There's just so many
options.
so many things to learn, and each race requires different preparation, which is awesome. There's another question I was going to ask you about the race. You did it. It was like 13 hours last year, I think I saw.
Yeah. What was it? Yeah, 13 something. I think 1350 maybe, something around there.
What pace did that come out to be? It's like 7 something.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, actually, is it? I think it might be.
Or is it?
Yeah. It might be low 8. I think it might be low 8. I'd have to break out the pacing calculator.
Because I mean, that's almost a minute slower than like your world record.
So my fastest 100-mile was 6:48.
And that was on a track, right?
Yeah. I blew up pretty bad at the end of Brazos. Like I left. Like if you look at my splits, like I probably gave back. I mean, I had some like pretty rough miles at the end there, like 10-minute pace type stuff there that really ate up on the average pace. I think I was probably moving between 7 and 7:30 pace for a huge chunk of the race, and then just didn't quite have a good strong finish there. So that skewed it a little bit. But
how big of a difference do you think it made from like doing that 100 miles on a track compared to, I mean, I don't know what your relative fitness was at the time, but comparing like 100 miles on a track like that to something like Brazos?
Yeah. So I guess the way I would say it, if I had my Pettit Center fitness at Brazos last year and then the weather was the same, I'm probably looking at something closer to like low 12, somewhere in there, that neighborhood. Because I mean, it was pretty humid, so that was a little bit of a hit. But it was still 70 degrees, so it wasn't like the worst you could get, especially after like the summer we had this year.
Right.
I'd like to. I'd be shocked if I'd be more than an hour slower than the Pettit Center, even with that weather, given how dry the course was. Had I been in that same kind of fitness state, so
it's still a very fast course.
It's very fast. Yeah. If you, in terms of like, I mean, because technically it's a trail. You can have a debate about where we should draw the line with trail and stuff like that, but. It's technically a trail, but between that one, when weather's good there, it's about as fast as you're going to find. Tunnel Hill is probably the fastest.
Where's that one at?
That one's in Illinois, Vienna. Okay. I ran 12:08 at Tunnel Hill. That's another one I want to do again at some point because I think that's closer to 11.5-hour course. It's just weather's almost always perfect. And it's just straight out and backs, 2 straight out and backs. Basically, there's a small little hill, but it's on a rails to trails bed. So like it's like maybe a 2 or 3% incline, and it's only for a couple miles, and then you come down it to finish. So it's like if you pace it right, you have like this little bit of gravity assist there too.
But that video you posted the other day of you chafing.
That was Brazos.
But I was gonna say, was that Brazos?
I was partially responsible for some of those 10-minute miles at the end.
That video, I was like laughing at your pain and like because I've been there before.
Yeah.
I'm like that. It's such an uncomfortable feeling.
No, it's the worst. Yeah. So if it gets humid like that, that is worth knowing. It's just like having reapplying is the move because like I've got a good setup for like anti-chafing stuff like in terms of what I do that works well, but I didn't calibrate it well enough for the humid for that duration of time. I kind of had like my same protocols I used in the dry weather, and it just wasn't up for the task. In the humidity, you just lose a lot of that stuff quicker.
Dude, that's got to be one of the worst things is you have everything is going great in your race, and then chafing comes up. It's like, of all things, that's what's going to slow me down.
And you're sweating, so then you try to do any sort of topical cooling, and it just rinses it over. And it's just like, you pay for that mistake over and over again.
Do you tend to chafe more when it's humid or when it's okay?
Mm-hmm. I hardly chafe at all when it's dry.
Do you know the reasoning behind that?
Yeah,
I think I'm the same way. It makes sense.
It's just the wet skin rubbing is going to create more...
There's more like catch to it, I guess, more friction.
And the other thing, too, is like when you have any sort of blistering or chafing, usually it's a combination of heat, moisture, and friction. Yeah. So if you can control one of those, then you really minimize the potential for that to become an issue. So if it's dry out, then you're just not going to get that moisture the same way.
Right.
You might get friction. You're going to get heat. Heat's the hard part because there's really no way around it. Like, especially if it's like on your feet, because then you're in shoes too. So then moisture control can be something that is worth trying to play around with if you can.
Will you swap socks and shoes and stuff like that during a race, or typically no?
I usually don't, but I always have the option there.
Yeah.
So that's what I usually tell people is I wouldn't plan on doing it just for the sake of doing it, but have it there. So like if you decide, and you might have a situation like, here's where I'd maybe plan it. If there's a race where you're going to get really wet and then thereafter it's going to be relatively dry, that's a great time to switch, because now it's like you're going to be able to benefit from that versus a day where it's like muddy, wet the whole time. Then it's like you change into this new pair of shoes and you're just back to the same thing. And
that's
like,
literally a Bighorn in a nutshell. My first year I did it, my feet, I think I had just fallen trench foot basically. Whole bottoms of my feet were like pruny and like the skin was peeling off. It was like one giant blister because there's so many creek crossings and it's muddy it's the whole course is like that. And so I swapped shoes and socks. It was probably too late, but again, it was like that same like catch 22 or like the same predicament is like, well, I could change my socks and shoes, but they're gonna be wet in 5 minutes again anyway. So it's like, how do you know how you'd prepare for that, or if you can prepare in any way for mud and wet feet for hours and hours?
Yeah, there's all sorts of technology out there. There's a company called DryMax Socks. I can give you a pair if you want. They have this technology where they actually do two things. In some of their higher model socks, they actually have like this Teflon coating on the inside, so it helps with the friction. And then they also have this fabric where the inside pulls moisture, and the outside repels. No, it's the other way. The inside repels moisture, and the inside like attracts it. So it's basically pulling the moisture off your foot.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so your feet stay a little more dry. So they're looking at it through that kind of that three-pronged thing where it's like we've got heat, we got friction, we got moisture. That's when the trouble occurs.
Yeah.
So they're trying to remove the moisture as much as they can, and then with the Teflon stuff, like a little bit of the rubbing if they can.
That makes sense.
I've had a lot of luck with that product for toe related stuff anyway.
Right. What was the name of those ones?
DryMax socks.
DryMax. I started using these ones for trail running and ultra stuff. They're called Exo Skin or Exo Toes. Have you heard of them?
Yeah, someone told me I should use those. So my chafing was all like midsection chafing and like.
Yeah, they make shorts too.
Yeah, so someone told me you should check those out. I was like, I'm gonna check anything out at this point.
Yeah, the toe socks are great. Obviously helps from like your toes rubbing together and stuff, but I think
in Gingy, I think they make the toe socks.
Yeah,
probably more than one model now. They were always the ones that had it originally.
Yeah, them and then Exo Skin. They're wool socks.
Oh, they have them too. Okay,
and they're the toe socks too, but those are great. I think I don't know if wool has that same kind of drying aspect to it or what it is, but there's something with it preventing blisters or chafing, I think.
Yeah, it might. I know wool is good for like staying warm when you're wet.
Right.
So you probably won't have to deal with that at Brazos, but it could be useful at a different race. If you go through the night at some of these and you're wet, it's like, oh.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the heat training from this summer will kind of carry. I don't know how long that actually lasts for, but I don't know if it'll last for another 6 weeks or not. But I mean, try and get out in the heat as much as I can over the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, it tapers off quick, but it's super easy to maintain. So the only input you really need is, and this could be like outside of the summer, you could get this, let's say it was winter and you're training for a hot race. Really all you need is about like 2 to 3 weeks, 20 minutes 3 times a week in a sauna after a workout. If you don't after work, you gotta have your core temp up a little bit, so it goes from like 30 minutes to 20 minutes.
Interesting.
So what a good protocol is like essentially this time out, like just hit the sauna for 20 minutes 3 times a week if you can, and after a workout, and then you'll maintain all of it.
Do you have a sauna here?
No.
Dude, I gotta get one. I have a cold plunge.
Yeah, do you?
I gotta get the sauna though. That's like the next key.
I've been going to On It for workouts. So they just redid their inside, so they have like a new sauna and a new cold plunge setup. So
I was waiting for them to get a cold plunge in there because I haven't been to the new setup they have.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet in there now.
Nice.
Yeah, they've got 3 cold plunges, and I can't remember, that sauna might have already been there. I can't remember. I hadn't used it because it was like during the summer. I joined at the beginning of the summer. So like I was just like I was not interested at all in getting a sauna. It's like I got plenty of this right now.
Yeah.
Going out.
Yeah, now that it's cooling off, I definitely want to get something I don't know. I need more space for it. They take up so much space.
Yeah.
But those big barrel ones are pretty cool now. And I think like Plunge, the brand, came out with their own version too.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, it'll be fun to see what you do at Brazos.
I'm excited for it.
Everything coming up, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Hopefully I provided some sort of value to somebody out there.
No, I'm going to do a whole bunch of episodes with people who are getting into running running and ultra running. I guess probably a little more of a skew towards that since that's what I like to do the most of.
Yeah.
But it's just there's so many new people in the sport and from just such a wide range of stuff. I would have never expected to see the range of different people getting interested in it. So it's gonna be fun to chat with everyone and kind of figure out what's drawing you guys all to this.
Yeah. I mean, you've been in it for how long? Have you I know you ran in college and stuff, but how long have you been running?
2010 was my first ultra.
Okay. Yeah. So you've been in it because the first ultra, I guess technically was like the 80s, but it didn't become mainstream till probably when you started getting into it, right?
So actually, the ultra running goes back even further. Like trail running is relatively new, but they had ultra marathons in the 1800s.
Whoa!
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
They used to sell at Madison Square Garden.
What?
They do this thing called pedestrianism, where they would be betting on people. And you know what? It got really popular.
What?
And then the bicycle, I think if I remember this, the bicycle killed it because they started switching to that instead. But it was just like people that are left out there like betting on these people. I guess it was probably all sorts of prop bets and then also like just weird duration type stuff. But yeah, they have, I mean, the record keeping was terrible. So like, I'm not sure when the first like official record started getting taken, but
how have I never heard of this? It's like,
it's wild.
Like Kentucky Derby for people, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah. Well, that's what some people are saying is like, if we want ultra running to really get to the next level, we introduce betting and then it'll blow up.
Yeah. It seems like it's growing like crazy though. It's so cool to see. And people, like Cam Hanes and Goggins and stuff, like they're just blowing up the sport, which you might have a different take, but it seems like a good thing, getting more people out,
I love it.
Active, and more money and more attention to the sport, more opportunities.
Yeah. The way I see it is like it's gonna grow fast one way or the other. So like any inputs that accelerate that, it's just like cool.
Do you think? I mean, Leadville now. I mean, have you been there in the last couple of years?
I haven't. No.
It's like one of these big. It's like the Boston Marathon of hundreds. It's like it's so commercialized and like hyped up, which is cool, but it seems so different from something what I imagine Brazos Bend is probably going to be like. Or
it's more traditional at Brazos. Right. Yeah. And I'll be curious to see how that actually plays out because right now the big commercialization push is around Ultra Trail Mont Blanc or UTMB. Yeah. So Ironman Triathlon bought UTMB a couple of years ago. So they've been kind of standardizing, commercializing, and buying up a ton of old like popular races essentially. So now they have like this ecosystem that's hard to operate outside of because you have to they call them stones. You have to collect a certain number of stones to get into the big one, the UTMB races. So, I mean, that's a polarizing topic in ultra running. People are like, they love it and hate it, or love or hate it, I guess. My take is like, let them do that 3-ring circus. Yeah. And then if there's demand for the mom and pop type events, then it's super expensive to do the UTMB, to do like 2 or 3 races just to get in and then go over to Chamonix and race it. I mean, we're talking about like you could spend $10,000-$20,000 easily to do to do like races to get in and then to do that weekend itself. So there's gonna be more people that want to do the sport that's just gonna be a price tag they're not gonna bite on. So that just incentivizes these smaller races like Brazos, or like the race I'm going to, Javelina 100. It's a huge event. The Aravaipa Running, they're a big organization now. They have 50 some events. But they've maintained a lot of the culture and a lot of the kind of like fit and feel of what you'd expect from an ultra marathon. So you see that too. You see there's definitely an appeal for that side of the sport still, and I think we'll see that continue to grow as well, just kind of alongside. So UTMB might be the first thing that someone sees, but then when they get around looking about how do I actually participate in that, they might say, oh, but there's also this 50-miler. An hour and a half from my house. Maybe I'll check that one out first before I start thinking about UTMB.
Yeah, Aravaipa is doing some cool stuff. I did one of their races in Colorado earlier this year. It was a 50K, but definitely like for being a brand and a company that's putting all these things together, and they're bringing more media to it, which is cool. It still has that very like mom and pop feel to it, which is cool. I saw they just did a piece on you for it was like an interview with Jamil, right?
Yeah. The media side, which is almost its own entity now, is really, they actually go to other races now too and put on like live streams and things
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
right.
So yeah, just wait till the drones get really efficient and
Yeah.
the Starlink gets good enough where you can actually
Right.
report from the entire course. Because sometimes that's the hard part is like there's people who are willing to go out there and like bring you the content,
Yeah.
but it's like, oh, they have no signal out here.
Yeah, the Starlink, that was all the races I crewed at this year. They were all using Starlink out in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, you guys have internet out here? It's
Yeah.
crazy. So, I mean, again, it's cool just bringing more attention to the sport and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully getting more people into it, which is cool.
Yeah, it's crazy. So you're at a good point to take it
Yeah.
all in.
Do you have you done, besides Western states, have you done any mountainous ultras?
Yeah, so I've done Western a couple times. I did San Diego 100.
Oh, that's right.
What other one? For 100 milers, that's basically it. I haven't done a ton of crazy mountain 100 milers.
Do you have any desire to do more of those, or do you want to keep doing the
Yeah.
flat and fast stuff?
I want to do more mountain stuff. I would say, like, generally speaking, I like to keep trail in the rotation. I haven't typically left it there as something where I'll peak for 100 milers a ton, outside of Western and San Diego. But if I do well at Javelina, I'll take my spot at Western and
Yeah.
make that my main race for the first half of the year. I do think I'm going to probably get in a little more like some of the mountain races or a little bit past. I like the running aspect of ultra so much. Going much more extreme than Western isn't always as intriguing to me because then you get so much more of a hiking component
Right.
into it. But that could change. To be honest, like the super shoe stuff has made it more intriguing to me because it's been somewhat protected from that. And
Right.
I'm not so much of a like an anti super shoe person that I would be like, all right, I'm done with runnable stuff
Yeah.
anymore. But to some degree, it's like if I had had my way, I think they should have regulated that stuff more. But you know,
Even for like marathons or
yeah.
ultras or
I've got a theory. I think if any brand other than Nike had come out with that technology, it would have got just regulated out of existence.
Really?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But Nike's just too big to.
Too big, and they kind of own the sport where
Yeah.
it's like they basically bankroll the Olympics and like
Interesting.
yeah. So it's like once they had the product, it was like to some degree it was going to probably exist.
Yeah.
Versus like I mean you have precedent with other sports like cycling obviously has allowed quite a bit of tech to come into the sport. To a degree the sport's based on tech. So there's that. And then swimming though went the opposite direction. They had those speed suits that they had for a while and then they eventually said, no, this is too much of an advantage, so they cut them out. And running I think there's good arguments for the super shoes where it's just kind of a continuation. My biggest gripe with them isn't the actual improvement of tech, because I mean the records are going to get broken anyway, so it's like why not just kind of speed it up a little bit. My biggest issue with them is like, and this could get solved over time, but there's such a range from one person to the next. I think it's like when they came up with the first 4%, it was like an average of 2 to 8%. So it's like if you're the unfortunate person who is 2% versus 8, like I mean that's the difference between you could be a gold medalist at the Olympics and also falling off the podium at that point. So it's like I understand that like the argument will be like, well, we have like why don't we go to barefoot then?
That is the hard thing. Is like
Yeah.
where would you draw the line? Maybe like no carbon plates or.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think the carbon plates are really the big mover with those. I think it's the foam.
Really? I know they have the stack height limit. It's 40 millimeters, I think.
Yeah.
But just.
Yeah.
Is there certain, I don't know what, like ingredient in the foam that like makes it, or a certain compound
Yeah,
or something?
so what it is it's the first, I mean, there's different types of this now that other brands have gotten into the mix, but the first was that Peacock foam that Nike came up with, and essentially what happened was before that, from a performance standpoint, you wanted as little as you could get away with. And the barrier to entry there was getting your feet to a degree where you could tolerate that. So you're like at 26 miles with these guys running sub 5-minute pace. That's a beating on your feet. So it's like to do that with a minimalist shoe or super low profile racing flat was a hard sell. But you could strengthen your feet and kind of do it. But like no one was going to wear a max cushion shoe at the front of a race. That foam, what it did is the way it returns energy is efficient enough where it's actually better than like the racing flats that people were using for the marathon, and more cushioned. So you sort of had like the benefits of cushion where it was easy on your feet, but performing better. So this is one of the arguments that you'll hear people say is the marathon went from this kind of race of attrition, whereas like everyone goes out at this kind of this pace that's kind of on the line, and then who's going to survive. Now it's kind of like who's going to accelerate through because their legs have been a little more preserved. And it's turned a little bit more into kind of like a 10K type of a field than it maybe had been in the past. But yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting thing. I think it is probably something where the foam. I'm glad they put some regulation, because before it was like the shoe that they were going to use. I think they actually used it for the Kipchoge sub 2 hour like expedition race.
That's right.
I believe that one was 52 millimeters, and I think they had like 2 or 3 carbon plates in there.
Oh my gosh.
So it was like a spring loaded.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I'm
Oh
glad
my
they didn't just
gosh.
let it go completely like
Right.
off the charts with that. But yeah, so my biggest, I guess, my thought is like, I understand like technology is going to play a role to some degree, but and then there's going to be variance from one person, because you could also make the argument like, well, Kipchoge was born with these attributes that other people don't have, and so to some degree it's like there's all these different things that you're getting. So if someone just responds better to the super shoes, then that's just their benefit.
Right.
So I get that argument too. My thought would be like, minimize the ones you can, so that the ones that you can't help don't all add up to like this like extreme thing. But I might just be too old.
No, I mean, there's a good point to it. I mean, I think about that, like playing hockey growing up, like the sticks now they're all carbon fiber, so they're incredibly light.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But like 30 years ago, they were all wood. They were
Yeah.
like 4 times as heavy.
Yeah.
And it's like, same with the skates. Like the skates were, I don't know, made out of like old steel and like these leather boots, and basically, and it's like now they're super lightweight and all this stuff. So it's like, I think sports, when there's technology involved, it's just like, that's what humans do, is they evolve everything, and I don't know, they just keep innovating and making things better, more efficient for us. So I don't know, it's hard. Like, I don't know where you would draw the line at exactly.
Yeah. And at this point, it's one of those things where I try not to complain too much about it, because it's just like, it's not going to change. Like they're not going to go back. And I mean, I guess they could. The swimming did. And when you said skates, that reminded me, do you remember that? You might be a little too young to remember this, but they had those clap skates back in the day. There was like one Olympic Games where the speed skaters, they had these skates where the heel detached.
Oh,
So
I never saw that.
I can't remember how the physics worked with this, but I think it was something to the degree where like when they kind of lunged forward into their like their pattern of their speed skating, the blade stayed more like, it was something with like the contact of the ice. It made it more efficient.
Interesting.
And they stopped. They don't let them use those anymore, I guess now. I don't think they do anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. I think it was just
Interesting.
one Olympic Games had them.
Yeah.
And then after that they put a rule in place that.
Yeah, I feel like that's the hard part with any sport that involves any kind of technology. Like swimming, that makes sense, because it's like, I don't know how much technology you could add.
It's like buoyancy is the big one.
Right. I guess that makes sense. And running, I feel like it all come down to the shoes. I don't know what else you could add potentially. But yeah. I don't know.
EPO.
Yeah.
I heard one of the better arguments I heard with the super shoes was like, someone said, well, at least we're going to clear out all the EPO records now.
How many? I don't know if this could be controversial, I guess. Like, do they test all these top people for like growth hormones or like,
In ultra running?
Yeah, like performance enhancement stuff.
Yeah, that's a big topic right now, because it's very unregulated. We have some testing. I've been tested after like all my records and stuff like that, but that's about the extent of it.
Yeah. Who would come to test you?
It's WADA.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is that? I don't know.
A World Athletic or World Anti-Doping Agency.
Oh, okay.
It's they run it through U.S. track and field essentially.
Okay.
So like if I would go to, so the Pettit Center, when I broke the world record for the 100 miles in 12 hours, they had a testing agent, a USATF testing agent on call for that in case a record got broken during that event. So then afterwards I had to go and do all the testing stuff. So, I mean, there's some Western States tests now too. That's like one of the bigger trail races. There was this system called the Quartz system, which was basically a joke, I guess. Like I didn't really like, it was more kind of over in Europe and for the Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, but there was a bunch of issues with it. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs to get more standardized to be on par. Because the reality is, like, when someone gets caught after a competition, my first guess is they they made a mistake versus they were cheating, because that's just something that you like if someone were to, like, if with these guys who are inevitably, people are cheating right now, they're doing it during their training, and they're doing it away from when they're going to likely try to get tested. So the only way to really control for that is random out of competition testing. So like if someone decided, hey, I'm going to start cheating for this like 6 to 8 week period of time, and then I'm going to taper off of it before my event so I don't test positive. Well, someone could show up at your door and test you, and you wouldn't know, and then that's how these people get caught.
Right.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah, so, and then it's like kind of a cat and mouse game of like finding something that isn't detectable or they're not testing for yet versus finding out what it is. So now they have like biological passport stuff where they have so this is why you've probably seen some of this where they'll have someone like, oh, they just discovered that so-and-so is doping in the 2012 Olympics.
Yeah.
So this is stuff where the technology for testing things has gotten caught up, where now they're going back and they're testing samples that they were. So you do have this thing now where like, even if you think, all right, I'm ahead of the system, well, you might be for now, but in 4 years you won't be, and then they're going to ping you. So like, enjoy it while it lasts, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it has gotten pretty sophisticated, but none of that has really gotten to ultra running in a big way. So that is something that needs to happen as more money comes into the sport. Yeah, the only random test I've ever had was at World 100Ks in 2014. I was rooming with a guy, his name is Max King, and he's done so much stuff in like both track and field, ultra marathon, all sorts of stuff. So we were rooming together. And at that time, I had just broke the 100-mile American record and 12-hour world record, and Max had all sorts of accomplishments. So like we get randomly selected, of course, and so we had to go down and do like the testing protocol stuff. Like I think it was like 3 days before the event or something like that.
Interesting.
But that was the extent of any random test. Because after a race, I just assume if I break a record, I'm gonna have to produce a sample and get tested. But
yeah, what do you know if the like world majors, they test like those elites for like marathons?
Oh yeah. They're probably on a rant. They're all probably in the testing pool, so they could show up and test them. The hard part is the anti-doping agency works through the different, like, essentially you have to have the country on board, because like if they're not doing their due diligence, then like it just gets like in trouble. And this is what Russia got in trouble for.
Is that like the Icarus thing?
Yep. Yeah. So they were kind of bypassing the system because the state was on board. The state testing stuff was like,
that makes sense.
Yeah, they were in on it. So
that documentary is crazy.
I know, it's pretty wild. Yeah. So Kenya is under some trouble right now, but kind of for a different system. I don't suspect like Kenya anti-doping is the problem. The problem with that is these agents, essentially, where you have these men and women who are like unknown but incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And it's like this agent goes in and says, oh, well, I can turn you into a professional athlete, essentially, and cash in on that because they're getting a percentage of it. But these people, I always wonder how many of these people actually even know that they're doing something wrong half the time, because they might just be getting like told what to do, essentially, to some degree. If they're, we were just talking before we recorded, Kipton was like a goat farmer before he became the world's fastest marathoner.
That's so crazy.
So it's like, you can, it's like it's hard to look at it through like the American lens the same way. And it's just, it's wild, but they get a lot stricter in terms of testing with that stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember I heard from like the whole Lance Armstrong era, like when all the Tour de France is like, you have to go down the line to like 24th place to find the first clean person that they knew of. It's like
he was probably just doing a better job and not getting caught.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's hard because it kind of reminds me of the super shoe thing, which is why I brought it up. Is it's like if everybody's doing it, like where do you draw the line? If it kind of evens the playing field to some extent, I don't know. It's hard to. It's like all this gray area basically.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd probably have the same debates if you just said like, all right, let's just unregulate, because that's the other thing is like, because when Lance's argument kind of was like, well, everyone was doing it, but you're going to have hyper responders to everything. So like if every professional athlete got on EPO, there'd be a range of benefits from one to the next too. So then it's also, there's that side of that same debate of, are you the 2% super shoe person or the 8% super shoe person?
Right. Yeah. If you got the bad hand, then you're screwed.
Yeah. It might be.
Yeah. Dang. Dude. Talk about running all day with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the moral of the story is enjoy the sport so you don't have to worry about that.
Exactly.
So you have a benefit from doing it either way.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, before I let you go, where can people find you?
Instagram's probably the number one place to reach out and connect. My handle is Jeremy Miller, and there's a dot between the E and the R on Miller, but just look up Jeremy Miller. Should be the first one on there, hopefully.
Yeah, you've got a great Instagram account, so it's fun to see all the stuff you're putting up out there. So hopefully everyone will give you a follow.
Yeah, there. And then I've also got the podcast.
Yeah.
Jeremy Miller podcast. Had Zach on there a while back. YouTube channel. Post like vlogs, long form content there. And thanks for having me on, man. This is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. You're going to be my first like official let's see why people are coming into ultra running.
Is that the name of the series?
I maybe I should refine that a little bit. But
I like it. Let's
see who's coming to ultra running.
I like it. No, I like the series. It's a great idea and it's cool. I feel like again you're gonna hit maybe a whole nother audience of people and get more people into the sport, which is always awesome.
Yeah, hopefully.
Heck yeah. Thanks again, dude. This is a blast.
Yeah. Take care.
Have a good one.
All right, everyone, if you're still here, you're sticking around to hear about how I use the show sponsor Element Electrolytes and Delta G ketones. For Element, they make an electrolyte supplement. So what I know about me is that I lose 614 milligrams of electrolytes per liter of fluid loss. So what that means is if I go out for a run and I lose 2 liters of sweat, then I'm also going to lose roughly 1,228 milligrams of electrolytes with it, which ironically happens to be about 1 packet of Element. So what I likely will do is if I'm going out for a longer training session or I'm going to be out in the heat and sweating a lot, I'm going to supplement the fluid intake I have with electrolyte to make sure I have that stuff in balance. The way this usually looks for me is I'll wake up in the morning and I'll have a cup of coffee and I'll put half of one of those packets in with my coffee. It will be one of their chocolate flavors though, because it's coffee after all. I'm not going to stick one of the fruity flavors in there. So that gets me kicked off. Then what happens is I go out for the workout and then I am drinking basically to thirst, but I am also targeting some numbers at times when it's hot enough and I know what my sweat loss is. But generally speaking, for every liter of fluid I'm taking in, I'm matching that with 614 milligrams of electrolytes to make sure I'm staying on top of that and remaining hydrated throughout that training session. If you're interested in a deep dive and figuring out more about your fluid loss and electrolyte needs, I actually have a couple podcast episodes that might be interesting to you. One is episode 358 with Andy Blow, where I go over all things hydration. And he talks about how I came up with that 614 milligram loss number and how you can maybe find out about yours, as well as how much fluid you are losing with some simple at-home tests. Also, I did an episode a while back, episode 300, which is just titled Personalizing Workout Hydration. So check out both of those if you're interested in doing a deep dive into your hydration and electrolyte needs. Something new I added to my training and racing this year are exogenous ketones. The research for exogenous ketones is still in its early stages, but there is a lot coming out and it is getting more convincing in my opinion to the degree where I wanted to try it out. I actually stress tested it during a 15-hour 100-mile run at the Rocky Raccoon 100 earlier this year as a way to confirm whether it was something I was going to include in my racing protocol. One thing I was a little nervous about with exogenous ketones, like I am with anything I'm ingesting during an ultramarathon, is what is it going to do to digestion. I was interested in the recovery research for some time now with exogenous ketones, and there are some newer research studies now that suggest it could also have some performance applications as well, if you're able to tolerate it and get it in the right dose. So when I decided to try it out, I went with Delta G ketones because they are the ketone ester that basically all the research that has promising effects is tied to, and it's their formula that's being used in those research studies. So a lot of times you'll just go and look for an exogenous ketone, and there's all sorts of potential issues with that, whether it's a dosage or just an incorrect type, and it's not actually going to do what the research suggests it would do. So to me, it was looking at if I want to potentially get the benefits that these could be bringing, I need to be using the one that they're actually showing the research with. So that was Delta G ketones. They actually received the DARPA funding and grant to actually put together that formula. So like I said in the intro message, they have 50 plus published studies and are part of 20 plus ongoing studies. My protocol with this right now, And this is something where I am evolving as I kind of do more with it. But at the moment, I'll do a bottle of their ketone performance, Delta G performance. And that is their little blue bottle. So I'll take one of those about 20 minutes before a big key training session, and that's it. If it's a race day though, I'll do that same protocol, but I will take another bottle about every 3 hours after that. So if I'm doing something that's longer duration, like that 15-hour Rocky Raccoon effort I just described, I would be doing that again at 3, 6, 9, and 12 during that particular performance. So like I said in the intro, if you want to chat with one of their experts, you can actually go to deltagketones.com, and they have a consultation service there right now where they will help you understand the research and whether your lifestyle is even something that they would be worth considering it for. So if you want to get a little more information on that, that option is available to you. Links to both Delta G ketones and Element electrolytes can be found in the show notes, as well as at zachbitter.com/HPO sponsors. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.